Okay, thanks, Rob. So yeah, so today we're going to talk about building an Alexa skill. And so I am based out of Helena. I work for Figure Technologies, which is a fintech startup. That's been for the last 2.25 years. So if anybody needs a home equity loan, we do a 5 days, or sorry, funding in 5 days, approval in 5 minutes. And or if you're looking for a sweet home mortgage refinance, we've got that streamlined too. Or you can go to figure.com and see everything else that we're doing with finance and blockchain. Prior to that, I was at SRI International for 20 years, and then in some of these later slides, you'll probably hear a little bit more on that background. I was under the impression that the 50 minutes and the 10 minutes of questions meant it was an hour minus 10, and so I was excited yesterday that I had this down to 52 minutes when I was practicing with my kids. So, so my goal is just to go fast, and in order to do that, I did add a couple slides to help encourage that I go fast. And also, the other thing you always hear is that to not be nervous, to just imagine that your audience is naked. And I was thinking, so these in these COVID days, we really have developers that are probably impatient anyway and want you to go fast. And most people are at home on their laptops in their underwear. So it's not really imagine this, it's kind of more the reality these days. I'm going to make one exception to that though too, because I've also been told that you should explain things as if you're explaining them to your mom. So for those purposes, she gets to be in her pajamas today. So there's our nice adjustment to the default template. Okay, so here's the overview. I'm not going to really say anything here. This is just your chance if you need to jump out because it doesn't look like what you're interested in, you can jump out. Okay, so first of all, so what is an Alexa skill? So, so with a skill, you're adding specific voice interaction functionality to an Amazon Alexa device. So by default, you get some basic functionality, but you can add all sorts of enhancements. And so to launch it, you would just say, for example, Alexa, launch PayPal. Or in the second case, you give it an optional request and say, Alexa, ask Figure how much my home is worth. So that was the project that I was working on. So you could look up and find what your home's AVM value or just approximate market value. Okay, so goals. So a couple things here. So mainly just wanted to show that that building Alexa skill is really within reach. Amazon makes it pretty easy to do this. And then also, if you've thought about this at all, just to get your foot in the door, because you can, if you have something out there, then you can watch it and you can see if people are interested, what they're interested in, and then, or if you end up having to do catch up later, it's going to be really hard to catch up. So if you're kind of in that space in some way, then you're kind of prepared if if things get bigger and if Alexa skills get more popular and it fits in with your business, or you find out how it fits in with your business. The other thing I was going to say here is that there's a lot of places you can go that'll give you a walkthrough of here's what you need to do to build a skill. And so the other thing that I wanted to focus on too is that a lot of times when you go through those, you can get stuck on something for a long time. And in that case, I have some examples here that show, okay, here I've got a mistake, and then we're going to go fix it, and we're going to see how to go about doing that, which you don't see in a lot of things. They just assume you do it perfectly the first time. All right, so this one is just, this is really just to show you that your voice is going through several hops as it gets to your skill. And right here in the middle is really where all the magic is happening in the cloud, because you have voice input that's going in, but that's going to get taken, it's going to get recognized, your voice is going to speech recognition is going to turn that into text, and not only do you get the text, but you're going to get that all wrapped up with some nice JSON that's going to be handed over to your skill. So it's going to look at that and it's going to say, okay, this input is destined for this skill, and it's going to package that all up and then hand it off. And then, of course, going back, you get the freebie of you just pass off text, and then it's going to come out as speech to the user. So this slide, I basically had said for the presentation that I would talk about lifecycle, and there weren't really any good slides out there. So this is also me experimenting with GraphViz and Dot. And the main things to call your attention to, though, here, you can see basically the yellow are the two ways that you're entering into the system. And in one case, you're going to this launch request, which is not an intent. In this other case, you're launching a skill and you're telling it what to do. And so in the case where you just say launch something, you're just launching it and you're not telling it anything to do. So it's just going to give an intro to, hey, you're in the skill. Here are the things you can do. Then when you look over here at listen, you can see pretty much that it can go all sorts of different directions. It's either going to hear you and then go to this action intent and do what you asked it to do. If it needs some info before then, it's going to go through some dialogue, and then it's going to fire off the action intent to collect what that intent needed. Also, you know that Alexa can get impatient, and so it might ask you something, and then it times out, and then it reprompts, and then it goes back to listen again. So that's really what you should get out of that one. I have dialogue there that really doesn't have, that actually itself is pretty big. So really the main takeaway from this one is that in a dialogue, you're going to be collecting some slots or name value pairs. So maybe you're making an order and it's going to ask you for, what size pizza would you like and what toppings would you like. So it can ask you your question, it's going to hear an answer, and then it can go back and then ask the other question. Or after it gets the answer, it could ask you to confirm it, and then it could go back. Then once it's all done, it can decide, okay, I've got everything together, am I going to confirm that entire dialogue or not? And then, when it's done, it can fire off the intent. The caveats were that you can have a timeout, you can give an unexpected response, and this action intent at the bottom isn't quite entirely true because you can basically have it called incrementally as you go through your skill, or as the dialogue goes through. Okay, so types of requests. So there's 4 types. So the launch request there, of course, was at the top where you didn't have the skill doing anything in particular. You're just launching it. The intent request, session-ended request. Of course, when you're done, it's going to tell you that that the person's done with your skill. Gives you some chance to wrap things up. And then there's a new one that's called the can fulfill intent request, which is basically you might say something like, I'd like to order a sandwich. And then Alexa could go out and say, hey, do you handle something like this? And you can say, yes, that's something I would handle or not. So in that case, the person said, I'd like to order a sandwich. They didn't say a skill name. And so it was prompting the skill to see if it was supported. The asterisk here on launch request is that it's not guaranteed. It seems like that's a really likely place that someone would want to put some initialization code, but you can't count on it because it's not necessarily that it's always called when it's launched. It's only called if they launch the skill without any other context. This part here, this is just a common mistake, is as you're looking through and Alexa says, here, the person wants you to do this, here's the intent, you can say, oh, I want to know the intent name, and then you can say, oh, if it's this, this, or this, here's what I want to do. But you can't call get intent name if it was a launch request because there was no intent, there was no named intent. So this is intent name. You can say like, is this the order intent? But if you say get intent name and hope that it's order intent, then it will crash on you because there was no intent name to get. All right. So basically in your code, you're going to have a handler for each type of intent that gets fired. And so whatever order you put that in your code is the way that it's going to do its matching. So let's say you have 10 intents, it's going to go through, okay, are you the handler for intent 1? Or, is intent 1, intent 1, are you the handler for this? Intent 2, are you the handler for this? Intent 3, are you the handler for this? And so it can then say, yes, I can handle it, or it will say no, and it'll continue on to the next one. So there's a couple tricks that you can do here. So one is if you wanted to do some logging for everything that came in, in that first can handle, you still get all of the information to evaluate if you can handle that request or not. So you could do some, do some logging, capturing, whatever you want to do. Maybe some timing to say, that you saw the request start. The other, of course, is at the end, you can have a catch-all handler, so if something wasn't matched. And one thing to keep in mind here is that in that catch-all handler, it's not going to be anything that wasn't matched. It's going to be something that Alexa said that you handled that you didn't answer yes to in any case. So you maybe created 5 intents, and it said, oh, here's one of those 5, and you never wrote the code for one. Or maybe you had code for it, but you said, no, I can't handle it because I'm in a certain state. Then you'd get to this end, and you'd have nothing, nothing to handle that request. Okay, so this slide is just titled Think, because when you're working with voice, it's a lot different than when you have a screen in front of you and you just have to go in and fill out fields. There's a lot more forgiveness when when you see a form, you can put things in different whatever orders you want to fill things in. You can see exactly what you're typing. So you can I don't know. I think that kind of came up earlier today as things could be kind of clunky and lots of different interfaces for things. But with voice, someone needs to say something and they need to say it in a way that it's going to be understood by the skill. So one thing you can do is prompt the user for what to say and how to say it. Another factor is that the response has time limits. You only get so long to respond, and while you're talking, if you're thinking about what you're going to say and you pause for too long, then it's just going to cut you off. Another, of course, is to avoid confusable phrases, because whenever you say something with speech, it's not always going to recognize it correctly. It can make mistakes. And so if you have, let's say something and you have bump and you have jump, and and it's trying to pick out just that word, if it missed a little bit of that or there was something in the background, it might get that wrong. If you have some long phrases and you said, do da-da-da-da-da something and do da-da-da-da-da another something, everything else was common up to that very end that's really distinguishing the phrases. So, so you got to really make sure that it gets that part correctly. So then that comes into, it could be wrong, so when do you need to confirm? That's another thing to think about. You're really going to annoy somebody in the, in the sample skill that you'll see. It's going to ask about, guessing a number. And if it's going to have you confirm that every time you make a guess, that's going to get really boring. But if you, if you're going to, make some online transaction, you probably want to confirm that at the end. The other is that since you're, training a user how to speak, how to speak to your skill, you don't want to make changes because they're learning how to interact with it. And so if you're going to change that all the time, again, if it's some UI, that someone might complain about, oh, where is that on the menu? But if you're changing what they say, that's a little bit harder. The suggestion here is look at some similar skills to whatever you want to develop, see how they interact with the user, and also decide what you don't like about that. If there's something that's confusing, then maybe drop that and then just take the good parts. Okay, so let's go into a little bit of history coming up to speech appliances. So back in 2011, so this is not the speech appliance, but Siri was kind of the first example where speech really went mainstream on devices that everybody had and wasn't really just dictation on a computer. I added here, of course, that since I worked for SRI International prior to Figure, that Siri is actually a 2008 spin-off that, from SRI that Apple bought in 2010. And then if you go back in time before that, for just some more on background that's kind of fun, I don't know, whenever Pocket PC 2003 was out, probably 2003-ish, back when Valerie was my intern, and now she's a director at Figure, we were kind of working on the first iteration of what eventually morphed into Siri, where we had a device, Pocket PC device that you could speak into, and then it would perform some action. And so here we were downloading, I think, movie titles, and you could simulate that you wanted to go to a movie at a certain time. So anyway, so my new intern, he has to be Hunter has to be thinking about what world-changing innovation he's going to be known for. Okay, so now we go to 2014. That's when Alexa came out, November, just for Prime subscribers. 2015 is when the Alexa Skills Kit came out, so that's what you're going to use to write, develop skills for Alexa. So that was June. Now, November 2016, so you can see 2 years before Google comes out with Google Home. So Alexa really got a lead there. And I don't know, I didn't know this, but there's a company called Linglong that launched an Echo competitor called Ding Dong. So I just thought those rhyming names were worth bringing up here. Echo Show came out in June of 2017. And so now you've got devices that not only do speech in the home as appliances, but they also have screens. So now you can watch a video or watch the news. And then 2018, in February, is finally when Apple's HomePod came out. So this is really just showing you that Alexa really got the head start here. So then, okay, are there other reasons that we would choose Alexa? So probably they're going to be mature. Got to go back to 1982 for a second. So this is for my childhood days. I had a Commodore 64, and this was my kind of first introduction to computers that could talk. So there's a program called Talking Sam, and here's something that we've lost over the years in most cases where you don't really hear TTS engines trying to sing. Oh, I think you won't hear it sing if I have it on mute either. Or not on mute, but no volume. So you can see TTS engines just haven't changed that much since 1982. Okay, so let's look at market share. So right now there's about 83.1 million smart speaker users in the US in 2020. So that's a good chunk of the US population. Here you can see on top, really this just shows that Amazon's got about 2/3 of those users with Alexa. Google's about half that, and then other is about half that again. This one, just to show you that really skills have been growing over time, and so now 100,000 skills in September of 2019. All right, so if you wonder what people are doing with skills, you can see trivia, audiobooks, lots of background sound, lots of music. Some things are coming in now, so at the bottom there are credit card balances, so people kind of linking into maybe other services that that they might have accounts on. And then, of course, this is a bit of a boring slide, so we'll do that. And so that's what it would look like if I borrow one and have some nice product logos on it. All right. So barriers to entry. So you want to build an Alexa skill. There are no barriers, right? Because development and deployment are effectively free. So the web API is free. Hosting your Lambda function is free with an asterisk. I don't know, it's beeping. S3 and DynamoDB come with your, if you host with Amazon, you get those for free too. And you don't even need a device. You can use the web API and you can test on that. So the quote here just says, most skills functions fall within the AWS free tier limits, and you may incur fees. But you can look at this pricing link and see, I think I'm going to mute this again. See if you don't fall into that free tier. Okay, so programming skills. So that's the other thing is, well, what kind of programming do I need to know if I want to do this? So if you want to get their SDKs, it's going to be Node.js or Python if it's hosted within Amazon. They also have a Java SDK, but that would be more if you're hosting it externally. Here's the site, blueprints.amazon.com. You can go in and you can just grab a template for something to start with, and then modify it. So really you are just modifying code, and you get to see all the examples. So that's what I'm going to do later. Okay, so terminology. Just do this real quick here. So whenever you're talking about speech applications, you always hear about modality, because it's a speech modality. If it's multimodality, maybe you have a screen and you have speech. When you are talking to Alexa, that's your utterance. And so that's an uninterrupted chain of one or more words. Of course, it's going to cut you off if you pause too long. The intent, when you say you want Alexa to do something, that's your intent. Slot, those are just name value pairs. So whenever you're collecting information from people, those are the slots that you're filling. You've got dialogue model and language model. So that's just dealing with the words. The dialogue is how you interact with the user, the back and forth. The language model is kind of what's under the hood that says, here are the words that follow each other. Here's a language model for addresses. Here's one for numbers and whatnot. Because you can't just generally recognize speech. You need to constrain it in some way. So you need that language model to constrain it. And then the acoustic model, of course, is what's taking the audio and looking at the phonemes and whatnot, and then gives that as input to the language model to get the words that you're speaking. And then there's barge in. I think most people know this, but most Alexa devices, as they're talking, you can interrupt it and say, Alexa, stop, Alexa, cancel. And that is barge in. All right, so what are the prerequisites? Really, all you need is a developer account. So if you follow this link, it's going to say click sign in and create an account, and then that's kind of what the page looks like that shows some of your options when you do that. All right, so now let's build something. All right, so we're going to create a new skill. So there's the link. Initially, all I need to do is say give it a name. So I called it Big Sky DevCon, since that's what we're doing today. And I chose Alexa hosted Python. So I mentioned data science earlier, and so Python should be no big surprise. And here again, you see 5 gigabytes media storage, 15 gigabytes monthly data transfer. So that's really quite a lot. And which skill did I pick to borrow from? The high-low game skill, and why is that? So it includes slots, custom intents, and session persistence. And this is the part where I thought if we had a big live audience, I would be getting a round of applause for my nice animated GIF here, which I put some noticeable amount of time into, which I'm going to reuse throughout this presentation, so you'll get sick of it by the end of it. All right, so what does the interface look like when you're in the web interface for developing a skill? This is the first thing that you're going to see after you've taken that template, loaded it up. Here in the bottom, you can see full build was successful. That means that the language model was built and it's ready. Then they have something, it's a high-low game skill. You can get some help. Here, change skill invocation name. So that's the first mandatory thing you have to do is give it a name so that you can say, Alexa, launch, such and such. Then we're going to go through each of these one by one. You've got build, code, test, and then distribution, certification, not so much. But we're just going to go through those to just get an overview of what each of those looks like. But before that, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to jump into demo time, and I'll put code up here. So I'm going to demo a few things. So I'm going to launch this sample one. It's in beta mode, and so it's tied to my email address. And when I launch it, I'm going to ask it for some COVID info. That's what this code here is doing. This is what the code part looks like that's going to execute when it sees that it is COVID info intent. And then after that, the other sample is really just telling the skill to wait for a few seconds. And the idea behind that is that you only get so long that Alexa can respond. And if your processing takes longer than that, it'll just boot you out. And if you don't know that ahead of time, it can be really embarrassing if you've developed some skill and you require something external, and you hit something that takes too long and you didn't guard against that. Alexa, ask Big Sky DevCon for COVID info.
I found COVID info for USA. There are 27,150 new cases today and 537 new deaths. Last updated 34.35 minutes ago. What next?
Test waiting.
What should the pause length be?
20 seconds.
I heard 20 and that is too high. Please say a number between 2 and 12.
2.
I heard 2 seconds. Is that right?
Yes.
Finished waiting for 2 seconds. What next?
Wait for 8 seconds.
I heard 8 seconds. Is that right?
Yes.
There was a problem with the requested skills response.
Okay, so that last case there was a problem with the requested skills response, means that, that Alexa just gave up on the skill and said, okay, if you look in the logs, and I'll show that later, it'll say after 8 seconds, it just is gonna boot you out. The other one, you should have noticed, it prompted me and it asked, well, one is it told me that 20 seconds was too long. Another is that it's confirming what I'm saying. So we're gonna look at that now, but at this point, I just want you to see, here's the code for that COVID info. So really, here I have an annotation, so I don't, all I have to do is put that special annotation in, and it's gonna add that as a handler for any intent that comes in, or any request type that comes in, actually. And so all that this one is doing is saying, if the name is COVID info intent, then this handler applies and return yes, that I can handle it. Here, I am just going to this URL, Corona API/US, looking for JSON. So this is the request API. The only thing missing in this code are a couple import statements for requests and date time. Then I'm going to return this speech text. So inside of here, I'm just going to pull out the JSON of the response and grab the deaths and the confirmed, and then I'm going to produce this speech text, which says I found COVID info for name, which is US or USA. There are so many confirmed new cases today and so many new deaths. Last updated, and that was in case it was not changing or just saying 0. Last night it was saying 0 because this was functionality I added at midnight because I thought just waiting was kind of boring, so I wanted to show something a little bit more interesting than that. So this right here then goes down, and if that failed, it's going to say, sorry, I couldn't look up info. And then this reprompt is basically, if I didn't answer within the timeout, then it's going to play that reprompt, which is to say, you can say help to ask for help so that you can learn what other things you can say. At the bottom here, we just tell the response builder to ask the speech text and the reprompts. We're building up that JSON response, and we return it. So that's all there is to it for the code. Corresponding to that, there's also a model that is going to say COVID intent, and I gave it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different phrases. So you could say coronavirus data, coronavirus info, COVID cases, coronavirus cases, or COVID info. So those are all the variations that I thought might be reasonable for firing it off. So that really, at this point, you could say, oh, okay, I know everything I need to do. You shouldn't feel too intimidated to say, I just need to fill out that for an intent. I fill out this for code, and then poof, I can launch my skill and do something. But let's just step through what that web API looks like. So here, we've got the build tab. We had to set our name, so we called it Big Sky DevCon. Okay. And then here you can build your model and update live skill. You effectively get 2 versions at any point in time if you have a live skill. So there's one that you're testing, and then if you want to push that live, then you can click the update live skill button, and then it'll make whatever you're developing go live. So here on the intents, here are the ones that come with the skill. You can see cancel, help, stop, navigate home. Those are all required and built in. You can see it's going to handle yes and no and fallback intent, and those are built-in types, which just means that of the slots that, of the intents that Amazon defines, you're just using preset ones. And then you have the number guess intent. So that comes with the sample skill that is telling you it's custom, and it's telling you there are 4 ways, 4 different types of utterances, 4 ways to phrase it, and then there's 1 slot that's being collected because it's collecting a number. At the top here, you can see there's a button to add an intent. And here, you can see this is new. This skill model sensitivity has to do with if your skill cannot handle what the input was. Normally, if Alexa hears something that's totally outside your skill, it might just exit. So, so this is going to let you catch that with this fallback intent. Once you put all that in, really, it's going to be saved as JSON. And so in what I'm doing, I actually generate this, and it gets a little bit tricky because sometimes there's some random indices that are set, and they have to match up at different places. So, but otherwise, you can see here pretty much we've got a couple slots for the number guessing game. We've got it's name number, its type is Amazon.number, and we've got 4 ways to say it. You can say number, is it number, how about number, or it could be number. Okay, so that's what you get with the template. So the slots, here's how it is collecting it in the example. You've named it number, and the slot type, if you were to look at that full string, it would say Amazon.number. And that, if you had a dialog with it, you could edit it there. They don't have anything, and they're not confirming it. So they're just going to take whatever number it hears. So if it hears it wrong, too bad. And then delegation strategy, that just has to do with if your intent wants to get first stab at anything that's coming into it. So it can say, hey, here's an intent, I'm going to start collecting these things, and then you can say, okay, fall back on Alexa, let her do the next step. And then it'll do the next step, and it'll come in and say, okay, I've got this, and it's unconfirmed. And then you can say, okay, do the next step. It'll say, okay, now I've confirmed that. And then you can say, okay, do the next step. So that way, it'll let you kind of keep tabs on things if you want to save any state, or even if you want to lock things out, because you can say, oh, I know they're in the middle of this interaction. Here's one drawback, is Alexa might, you can say something outside of what it's asking, and it'll still go and fire that off. So at least with your intents, all those places that we went through, where you say, oh, yes, I can handle this, you could say no, and say, sorry, you're in the middle of something else, I can't handle this. So you could have a flag based on this. Ordering, so if you're collecting multiple values, it's going to collect them in whatever order you've placed them here. So here's 1, here's 2. So you just need to know that. Otherwise, you might think it's random. I need to collect 5 values. It might be in a random order. It's not. It's going to go in the order listed here. Okay, so slot types. So basically, anything that is standard input that you think you might want to collect from somebody, hopefully Amazon has that set up for you, because you don't want to write lists yourself of all the US cities, or how to parse a date and things like that. If you need some general input, you can use Amazon.search query. So an example might be a memo taking app, and say, take a memo, do such and such, or such and such happened. So lists of items, animals, colors, days of week. And if you want to customize those, you can add to those. So maybe you want some basic set, but maybe you get cities, but you have a couple oddball cities in your state that you want to add. One type, not everything is there, so dollar amounts. That's a case that would be nice, because you might say $10.52. You might say $10.52. There's a lot of different ways that people say that, so it'd be really nice if it handled that for you, but it doesn't. So you'd have to write, but basically do all of the work yourself by getting 2 numbers and then optional dollar and optional cents. So when you're done with your model, you just say to build it, and you'll get some info back on whether that build succeeded or not. The evaluate model lets you go in and type and talk to Alexa that way, so you can see what it would do with that language model. Okay, so the code tab is here. And so, so this is the sample code that comes with the skill. You can see on the left, you just have lambda function, requirements.txt, a Python thing, utils that has some standard utility functions that you need with Alexa. And then at the top, just like you had with your language model, you have a deploy and promote to live for your code. All right, and then the last tab is test. And so here you either can click the microphone and speak, so it's a hold to talk system, or you can just type in there. There's some issues if you type. I've got that in there a little bit later. Here you can see JSON input and output. So this is exactly what comes in and out to your skill. So you can look at that to debug or whatnot. So, and then here you can see 1 of 2. So sometimes there will be, there'll be 2 different data transfers that happen with some inputs and outputs. So if you know that there's that pull down there for the 1 and 2, then you can examine all of it to see what happened as you're debugging. So yeah, so that went through the tabs. Logs isn't quite so apparent. So when you're under code, in the bottom left, you can see Amazon CloudWatch. So, and we're at about the 5-minute marker, so I know these other ones are gonna be fast. We're gonna skip through some things. So that pretty much showed you what you would need to modify to add things. Oh, once you bring up the logs, this is what they're gonna look like. Everything's gonna have a start request ID. You're gonna see it's reprompting. You can see SSML, that's speech markup language if you want to put some fancy timing or whatnot in your speech. And here it just says say yes to start the game or no to quit. It says should end session false. So if your skill is done, if you told it to do something and it's done, you can say end session, you're done. Or you can say, no, I'm prompting them and I want some more info. So then you'd say should end session false. And then here we end it, and you can see it took 163.23 milliseconds. Build duration, so you know how much you're getting charged in those logs. So beta test, that comes, we looked across those menus, and the next one after test lets you do the deployment and certification. So certification is to make it live. So the important thing here is that you can have up to 500 users trying your skill as long as you have their email addresses. So if you have friends and family, then it's easy to make a skill and let them use it. So if anyone wanted to try this one, I would just need your email address that goes with an Alexa account. And that lasts about 90 days, and then you can go back and renew it if you need to. Okay, so there's the distribution, there's beta test. All right, so customize. So this, I'll just kind of go through these, and I'll make the slides available so you can see. But here's where I make the wait intent. So intent confirmation. I'm not going to confirm the intent because I'm going to confirm the number, and that's going to be enough for me. I don't really need to say, did you say 3? Yes. It says, okay, I've got it. Are you ready to proceed with the waiting? That would just be too much. Here's the edit dialog button where I do have a dialog. So let's take a look here. Or actually, on the last page, all it says is test waiting or wait for seconds. So you can see those curly braces are giving the slot that you have here. And so I called seconds, and it's an Amazon.number. So it's going to say, to collect that, it's going to say what should the pause length be. And then user utterances, we have number seconds or number. So they could say 3 seconds or 3. And then does the slot require confirmation? So yes. So remember it said, I heard 2 seconds, is that right? If you said no, then down here it says, it's covered up, but where the Alexa speech prompt is, it says, I heard number seconds, is that right? Okay. So now we're gonna look at validations, but first, what you'd want to see here is I did have bugs because those, I wrote number and it should have been seconds. So hopefully I can get to one error so you can see how that shows up. This is really, I'm just going through the validations. I'm saying I want numbers that are greater than or equal to 2 and less than or equal to 12. And I have 2 different responses. So one says, oh, that's too high, and another one says that, that's too low, and the other one says that's too high. And again, I'm still using number when I had seconds. So it highlighted that as red, so I should have noticed that. So what happens because of that? It says build failed. You said one thing. You said seconds, and you used number. So there was the code, and right here it says waiting for seconds, but here I called it. Oh, sorry. This is another bug. So bug number 2. Okay, so this one says there was a problem with the requested skills response. And in that case, it could not even launch my skill. And it says unexpected indent. So of course, this is Python. And so when I added the new code, I had indented something below it. And that was flagged. So just knowing that you can poke into the logs is good to know. This is the example where if I type in the number 48, it doesn't like it because it's expecting words. It used to be that it would, it's gone back and forth, so things change under the hood. So Yeah, so just think when you say a word, 48, to get the numbers, you really have to take 48, put them together, and convert it to a number. So to be most consistent with what the words would look like, you really want it spelled out. Here it says I can't understand that. This was just a case where I think it hadn't applied yet. Here's a gripe that I have. It says number guess intent. And it's returning question mark as a value. So you're expecting numbers, and it's returning question mark. So I don't really like that behavior. So here, let's just see. So I'm out of time. So we can, I don't know if I should go through these or start taking questions now, or. Okay, so I'll just keep going. So here you can see that the wait intent was fired. You could see the last one, the seconds was 3 passed in, and the dialog state was completed, which meant that if I was iterating through it, then this would say I was done. Go back to the logs. Okay, seconds was not defined. I kind of hinted at that on the last one, saying that I called it wait seconds and referred to it as seconds. So poof, there's the bug. Here we have a success. I say, wait for 20 seconds. So this is really just showing you on the screen what you would see in that on that test tab. Kind of the same thing I went through on the device. Here is where I'm showing the same example where I tried 8 seconds and then it timed out. And so in the simulator case, it just said there was a problem with the requested skills response, same as it was voiced out. But of course here, I can look at that JSON in and out, and I can see actually here it says invalid or session ended, and it was invalid response, and that was invalid response from the well, sorry, not invalid response. It just actually had no response because it gave up. But when I look in the logs, you can see task timed out after 8.0 seconds. So that's where you get the idea that, oh, okay, they give you a hard-coded 8 seconds. So if you want to work around that, if you're doing something that's going to take significant time, you can play multiple bits of speech back. And so as long as you could take 5 seconds, play some speech, take another 5 seconds, play some speech. So as long as you keep giving some outputs now and then, you're good. Here, I told it 20, and of course that's outside the range. And it said, oh, that's too high, say a number between 2 and 12. I said 1. So now it should say, oh, that's too low. But no, it just says exceeded max reprompts. So that's another thing that's kind of baked in. So it just silently exited on that second attempt. So we peek at the session data. So for the most part, your session data is transient. And somebody starts your skill, and they work with it. You can save these things. Now, if they exit and they come back, you don't have any info on that person unless you decide to persist it in some way. And so here you can see the sample app is tracking number of guesses, game state is ended, games played 2. So what does that look like over here? You just grab session attributes. There's number of guesses. There's an example of accessing something and changing it. And then there's the boilerplate code that you get with the sample skill that saves the session that saves it to an S3 bucket, so you can persist state and then refer to it if that person comes back. And so that person's going to have a unique ID so long as they don't uninstall your skill. If they uninstall and come back, they might have a different ID. So let's go through some of my gripes here. So we looked at tabs that had model and code, and you could see that I put 2 and 12 in there as my caps. It would have been really nice if I could have said, oh, call this function. I'd like 2 to be something that I said in my code and have that return. But there's not really any insight back and forth. Or maybe you'd want to say, oh, into the model, maybe add this city to my list. Let's see, so built-in Amazon repeat intent. So that's something that they support, but they don't have any built-in default functionality for it. So if you want to do something for it, you have to handle it yourself. The yes-no responses that game is using, those are just global, and so it's not really tied to anything. So you need to know what was the context if yes or no fires. When that Amazon.search query, if you want to use some open speech, you have to put that carrier phrase with it. Knowing just what's going to match, so if you list a bunch of phrases, there's some natural language voodoo going on that's going to decide if it's a match or not. When someone speaks audio into the system, you can't ever get at that. Delegating, that's if you're inside something and you want to hand off to something else, you can't change, if you change the session state, it doesn't see that in the next, in what you hand it off to. No easy way to tell dev from prod. So if I'm, I might want to have some settings that apply that I'm developing. Maybe it lets me do different things. Maybe it plays back some extra info. I haven't found any way that lets me know if I've got the deployment version or not. And then some of the amounts are arbitrary. So we saw where it cut me off at 2 attempts. It gives me 8 seconds to respond. So these are some surprises. I mentioned the question mark. I think I mentioned a lot of these things. So yeah, this example with an address. So I mentioned briefly that you might give some answer, but it might fire something off totally different. So in this case, I said 59601. It misrecognized as 5Night601, and it thought, oh, that's 5 Night Street. That's some address. And that was really hard to debug because I clearly gave it a number. And even when it plays that back, I heard 5Night601. That sounds a lot like 59601. So it's not an apparent error. So I will quickly just leave up the summary because that's about all there is. So things you can do now. You can get a developer account, understand the SDK. You saw the web UI. You can build a skill, create a custom intent, collect some values, some pitfalls and problems. We saw kind of how to work through those. You can invite your friends, have up to 500 people try on your skill. Some things we didn't do, won't focus on that at all. And the end, I had, of course, my kids are teenagers, and they decided this was an appropriate meme. I asked, how should I end this? What slide, what picture should I end with? And they picked this one. So anyway, thank you.
All right, we have a couple questions. One, so in terms of multilingual, multi-speech language support, how's that handled? Do you write a different skill for each language, or do you have a way of targeting different language groups?
Yeah. So there's 2 things on that. So there is internationalization support. I haven't really looked into that. I've seen it in other cases where you can, basically refer to, generally refer to a variable, and then you say, oh, here's the English version, here's French, here's German, and whatnot. So I don't really know what it is here, other than I know it's supported for many different languages. The other is when you set your skill live, you can choose which countries you want to set it live in. So you can choose just the US if that's what you're supporting, or if it's US and France, then you could choose those 2. So I can't give more details than that though.
How about in terms of the skill name, the invocation name, is there any kind of Amazon enforced uniqueness, kind of like a domain, or is it just the Wild West?
Right. So I think that's a little bit ambiguous. They want you to have more than one word, and yet at the same time, they allowed me to certify a skill that you launched by calling it figure. And my understanding too is that you can have the same name as something else so long as it's not a conflict for a particular user. So if a particular user wanted to install 2 skills that were launched the same way, then there'd be a conflict. So at least right now, I think you can still pretty much call it whatever as long as you don't have, or as long as they don't install more than one skill with the same invocation.
How about in terms of when you're debugging problems in your deployed skill, is there a way to get voice samples of what people spoke, or some kind of anonymized data around what people are trying to input?
Yeah, as far as I know, there isn't, and so that was part of one of my gripes, because that's since having worked in speech recognition before, you always want to hear it and say, oh, what did it did it misrecognize it? Did they say something? Or you might want to say, well, what are they saying, so that you know what to respond to? Because if they say something and you don't get a result, then maybe they said something that was pretty legitimate, but you just didn't handle that phrase. So no, that's a complaint.
Is there any kind of formalized error reporting system where, as a developer, you can say, if this happens, put this error in the log?
Well, you can do standard, logger.error info warning, and then you'll get that all time-stamped. If you have any JSON in there too, and you dump that, then in that log viewer, it'll actually expand that nicely for you, so you can see that.
Great. I think I got all the questions.
So,
Thank you.
okay, all right. Well, thanks, and apologies for going over, but that was my fastest one, so I hope it was okay.